Good afternoon, sir.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, sir.
All right, it's 6 o'clock, but let's give it another minute or two. So let's wait for the others.
Hi, sir. Good evening.
Good evening. Okay, it's 6:02. Maybe the others will join us a bit later. Sige, we can start now. I expect the session to be a short one. Maybe we'll finish in an hour 15 at most. Last night, in my other class, we ended in an hour. So it depends really on how things progress. Maybe if you have questions or so. Depends on the discussion, but maybe an hour. No? So this is part two of module three. So I hope that most of you are already, most of you have started module three. No? So again, since it's a semestral format, so it's more, you have more breathing room. In the semester, no? Because this is pretty much the same course that I taught last time, no? It's with a quarter format. So this one, it's more spaced out. So expect more time to finish the modules and expect shorter synchronous sessions because as you know, as I keep mentioning, the synchronous sessions are meant to either summarize if you've covered the material already or to introduce or to be a preview, serve as a preview. So module 4, which is the longest one, it will probably take you a month, no, if you're with the regular pace, no, to finish that. So I'll post that before October 18th, definitely. If you're interested to know, I'll try to check the assignment soon. Maybe I'll probably grade them by next week. Hopefully by the end of next week. Takes me a week or two, no, because again, I'm only teaching part-time. I have a full-time day job as well. So all right. So again, if you have questions on mundane stuff, logistics, assignments, etc., let me know. No? I trust that all of you are already assigned to groups for your big keys and your final integrated output. Again, let me know if you're encountering difficulties. Not don't but pero avoid yung sumbong, no? That, sir, my group mates ganito. So, I trust that all of your adults will be respectful of each other, no? Let's avoid yung sumbong because in the real world, no, when you start working, you can't choose sometimes your group mates, no? Or sometimes group dynamics aren't ideal. No? There's never wala namang perfect na group dynamics. No? All right. I don't see any questions or comments. So we'll jump into the module, no? In the part 2 of the module. So last week, for part 1, no, we covered some of the more old school classical growth paradigms, no? And we ended with the free market approach, no? And as well as my own paradigm, no? Which I will also discuss later on, no? The social democracy paradigm. So what we're doing right now, we'll continue exploring paradigms, no, on how, no, start learning, no, and continue learning some theories, some models that economists and academics have proposed, no, since before. No. Again, no model is perfect. What we're trying to do is we're trying to do a scan, no, scan of the models and see what good things we can pick up. No model is perfect, but no model is completely useless. So this evening, we're gonna discuss the structuralist approach, and we'll talk about the sectors of the economy. We'll also go into more extreme paradigms, no? The Marxist paradigm and neo-Marxist paradigms, and then the false paradigm, so what they call dependency models. So it's basically I'm giving you the complete range. And I think all the other SOCSI professors are doing the same. A good scan of the models. All right. So before we jump into the Lewis dual factor model, let's first revisit Rostov because there's a lot of overlap or alignment, no, with what Rosto was saying. So from Rosto, again, you have basically everyone starts out as a subsistence agriculture society, and then the more you progress, the more you build a strong, robust manufacturing sector, and then all the more that you create different industries. No? So it's agri, then eventually when you progress, it's manufacturing. And now, no, kasi Louis Rosto was in, they were popular in the 1900s, 1800s. No? Now the economy, as we'll discuss later, is composed of three major sectors: agriculture, manufacturing, and services. Services and manufacturing naman, more or less interlinked naman yan. Services mean like BPO, financial services, banks, no, accommodation services, tourist services, etc., etc. So that's the Rosto stage, no? Linear, no? Agri muna, manufacturing, then eventually it's implied that it's manufacturing and also services. So that's Rosto. The second thing I wanted to review first is the law of demand and the law of supply. I think this should be very, very basic for most of you. Most of you probably did some basic economics in high school or even in college. But again, as I mentioned, I learned last year that economics 102 basic economics is no longer required. I think this is sort of your basic econ course folded into sustainable development. But it's less technical, as you'll probably notice. So just to give a short summary of the law of supply and demand, it's very simple and it's very intuitive. It's the phenomenon that you would expect. So here on the y-axis is the price of a certain good or a service. Here on the x-axis is a quantity. So here's the demand curve. Here's the supply curve. So for example, you're selling, for lack of a better example, a burger, or beer na lang, or whatever, beer or burger. You're selling that. So if the price is 50 pesos, then the demand is 1,000 units. Okay lang. But for example, for some reason, the price of the burger, nag-promo or whatever, the beer goes down to say 20 pesos na lang, no? You'd expect more demand, no? More people wanting that. The quantities on the x-axis. On the flip side, supply naman, no, the willingness of suppliers to sell naman, if the price goes down naman, no, from 50, no, you'll see supply contract. Kasi of course, lugi, di ba? Of course, sellers would want to sell at a higher price. So it's the opposite. Kaya one is downward sloping, one is upward sloping on supply. And again, if the price naman goes up, no, you'd expect less consumers. And then if the price goes up naman, you'd expect more suppliers wanting to sell. So that's the push and pull of demand and supply. This is the very very foundation of economics, supply and demand. If you don't remember anything about economics, do not forget the law of supply and demand. You can actually interpret most things, no? Like why is the peso dollar exchange rate high or low by supply through the lens of supply and demand. So equilibrium is the point at which they compromise. No? Sakto lang, it's the balance. No? It's where most buyers and most sellers will agree to the price. So agree sila 30 pesos. It's equilibrium. There's no excess supply, no excess demand. Sakto lang. So the law of the demand and the law of demand, actually, no, not supply, no, is all about scarcity. And we'll discuss this in detail when we discuss the Lewis dual factor model. Whenever there is scarcity, you would expect the price of a good to go up. If there is scarcity. Ganon din. So that's the law of the push and pull of prices. So that's the reason why water is cheap while diamonds are expensive. It's scarcity. All right. So remember those two things. Rosto stages, agri, manufacturing, and ultimately services. And then the law of supply and demand. And when you add an element of scarcity, the price will eventually go up. All right. I hope that some of you have already watched the video here for Lewis or have gone through the Canvas course. It's also in the Todaro book. I hope at least a few of you have done so. So I will ask a question later. Let me explain first the dynamics of what's happening. Just like Rosto, all countries start with an agriculture industry. But now there are, with an agriculture, agriculture-oriented economy. So now think of a country's economy in terms of two sectors lang. Services kasi, the category of services came much later in economics. So think, two sides to one coin of a country's economy. There's agriculture and there's industry. Industry lang naman, again, the mental mnemonic there could be factories, urban manufacturing. Manufacturing, yun na lang. Let's use that as your mental mnemonic. Any kind of process, factory, building, offices, that's industry. And you would expect the agriculture to be more in the rural areas, industry or manufacturing more in the urbanized or suburbanized areas, or what they call peri-urban areas. So yun nga. So it's two sectors, agriculture sa rural and then industry in the urban areas. So what happens now? Lewis was basically saying, for example, in the countryside where there's agriculture, first there is this scenario where there is a lot of surplus labor in the countryside, meaning all necessary farm workers are employed. Those who are not employed don't add anything. Kaya nga, the MPL or the marginal productivity of labor is zero. Marginal something is an economic term, a marginal propensity to what? The term marginal, to simplify, it just means an additional unit, an increment. What a certain variable adds. So here it's zero because, for example, just to illustrate the marginal productivity of labor being zero, here the scenario is if there's a surplus, imagine there is a farm. Just to simplify, the farm has 10 workers and they produce 1,000 kabans of mangoes or rice. 1,000 kabans of rice, 10 workers. If you add an 11th worker, the output of the farm remains at 1,000 kabans of rice. So the marginal productivity, the additional productivity of that extra laborer, the 11th laborer, the additional one, is zero. Kasi wala naman siyang nadagdag, diba, na output. So that's how you define or illustrate marginal productivity of labor equals zero. So kaya nga may surplus because they're not needed. Diba? Surplus happens if something or someone is not needed. So each additional labor, if it's, let's say, a farm has 10 workers, even if you keep on adding labor, it will not increase output. That's when you have a surplus. Now, Lewis was saying, now what about, so of course, these people will be looking for opportunities. They still need to work, so they can earn money. So now they can look outside, outside the rural areas. Now, because there are two sectors, diba? The agriculture sector and the industry. So now what's happening now is in the urban side, you have factories, and they need workers, and they tend to attract, just like people wanting to migrate to Metro Manila or Cebu or Davao, you now see the phenomenon where the urban sectors, because of manufacturing, they have higher wages. Now they tend to attract, no, especially those who are surplus labor. Kasi wala nga silang opportunities in the countryside. Now, they get attracted, and they get attracted more because of the higher wages in the urban sectors. So what's going to happen is, so the urban centers, they keep investing in manufacturing, no? They keep pulling in surplus labor because it's attractive, higher wages, no? Profits naman, no? They keep selling stuff, they generate profits, and then they replow it back to the business. They invest, they grow the business, they need more workers. They again get from the rural labor, so it keeps happening, no? Keep mopping up surplus labor from the countryside. Kasi, their business is growing, manufacturing is growing, they need more workers, sige, kuha lang, kuha lang. And they keep attracting because it's higher wages. No? Now, at a certain point, something happens. No? At a certain point, something happens. It's what we call the Lewis turning point. Sige, paulit-ulit lang. They keep getting people from the rural side. What do you think happens? No? What is the Lewis turning point? Or think about it, or if you've gone through it on Canvas, what is now the Lewis turning point? Anyone, or wala pa kayo doon? Canvas. I'm sure at least one or two of you have finished covering this. Any guesses lang? Or guess na lang, no? You don't,
Sir,
what do you think would happen? Sige, go ahead, Sophia.
when the surplus labor in agriculture runs out, so it can't supply to the urban areas anymore.
Yes. Okay, then what happens next? That's right. That's the first piece of the puzzle. Then what happens? There's no more surplus. What ends up happening? Sige, let's give a chance to Ravi naman. But you're
Sir, the
correct.
surplus is now at the industry.
Not necessarily, because they will not necessarily hire unnecessary people, diba? So they will not hire surplus workers. They will hire surplus workers from the countryside, but it's not a surplus for the urban sector. Diba? Diba, if you're a businessman, if you don't need a worker, you won't get naman a worker outside. So it's not necessarily going to be a surplus in the urban center.
Sir, can it cause inflation?
Inflation in terms of?
Since it's all going already to the manufacturing sector, there isn't any more supply of workers for the rural sector. So since the supply is lacking in the of labor, it becomes more expensive, I guess.
Yep, exactly. So the rural wages go up. Sophia was correct, no? In the sense that, at a certain point, no, a surplus will no longer be a surplus. No? And the tendency is now, the rural wages now go up because you need to, the problem now is, what's happening now is there's no more surplus, diba? So even the people who are employed in the farms get attracted kasi the wages in the urban centers are higher. So what ends up happening, there's now pressure from the farms themselves, no, to increase the wages to keep. Diba? Kasi before surplus lang eh. It's easy, no, you're getting the unemployed. But now you're even attracting or poaching, no, potentially poaching those who are already employed. So what should the rural, intuitively, no, what should the rural farms do? No? They are now pressured to increase the price to keep the workers naman. Kasi it's scarce na eh. labor becomes scarce, as Marcos said. Perfect, no? Whenever a commodity, whether that's labor, whether that's a commodity, whether even if it's a person, no, the law of supply and demand, the law of scarcity, is in effect. There is an upward pressure because labor has become scarce, no? And this pull from the urban centers trying to poach them from you. Now you have to respond by increasing the price, and then there's that parang seesaw yan, push and pull effect, no? And eventually the urban wages will also go up. Parang it's not necessarily intentional, no? Pero because of the scarcity in that urban-rural dynamics, no, both wages tend to go up. Naglalabanan sila. Not necessarily intentionally, no, but that is the overall effect that will happen. So that is the Lewis turning point. And later on, we'll go to a good example. Kasi this is, up to now, no, this sounds theoretical. But it sounds, sounds logical naman. But always remember, no, when you're reading the news, for example, this price went up or this went up, it can either be, there's always scarcity, no? It can either be too little supply, yung oil natin, for example, or too much demand. Yun lang naman economics. The reason why meat prices, for example, are expensive now is because there's little supply. May pandemics, even hindi lang sa people, even the pork, the pigs have the African swine flu. So pwedeng supply yung cost or the demand yung cost. So yun. Before we go to the example, let's now go to the criticisms. It's a bit logical naman, no? But there are criticisms also. No? All of these models are not perfect, and there are criticisms. No? One is the assumption. No? The assumption is the manufacturing hubs keep growing. They keep, the profits are invested in the business, and they hire more workers. But actually, the opposite can be true as well. No, with technology, manufacturing companies can now replace people with with machines, especially now yung artificial intelligence, what they call industry 4.0, etc., etc. So we can actually buy equipment from the profits and replace humans, so no need. That's one criticism. Second is, it's not empirically sound. No? They're always saying the assumption is there's always excess rural labor, but in some countries, actually no. Sometimes most of the people, whether they have low quality jobs, they are still employed. So they might not be some significant levels of surplus labor. And the third, which is my favorite criticism, again, it's the for me false paradigm of Rostow that agriculture is relegated to a very backward industry. No, it's not. It can coexist actually. No? It's again that bias against agriculture na para agriculture lang. No, actually, agriculture and industry can coexist. Technically, if you in terms of economic statistics, once agriculture, let's say crops or livestock, get processed into, let's say, your canned goods or your or food or whatnot, now it's no longer agriculture. It's now technically considered manufacturing. So actually, they can coexist, no? Even in the rural areas. No? You can have both agriculture and manufacturing. So no need to attract outside. Spreading in the same area. But of course, we're trying to get what is good out of the Lewis dual factor. So what is it good for? It's actually a good description of what usually happens. In the case of Manila, in the case of Cebu, Davao, the urban centers now start needing workers kasi nga they're trying to set offices, urban hubs, etc., etc. That's why people flock to Manila. No? And it's also and you know the good thing with the what you want to get out of Lewis as well as Rosto is the emphasis on manufacturing. When a country focuses on trying to facilitate manufacturing hubs, that really is a game changer because that's the one that can employ the most number, no, the greatest number of people. It's really the focus on manufacturing. Even agriculture can be linked directly to manufacturing. So the best lesson from Lewis is each country is advised to really, and you have the Korean, you have the Chinese examples here, no? Yung video, yung Korean case natin, no? They were also, no, practitioners of the Rostow and Lewis gospel, no? Of focusing not just on human capital, no, but on manufacturing, and then getting the best people to supply that manufacturing. And what's good about the Lewis dual factor is it's a good examination of wage range determinants. If labor is scarce in an area, then labor tends to go up. Good. So yun nga, what they're saying, mamaya na lang, I'll explain the three sectors to you guys. Now, in Canvas, no, I also shared, I think it's from the Financial Times or Al Jazeera, or both. China is often cited as one of the best models, no, of actually having reached the Lewis turning point. Can anyone tell me why? Why is China? What happened to China vis-a-vis this Lewis turning point? Sige nga. Go ahead, Gabriel. And then Alfonso. Go ahead.
Sure, I think because China went through this really rapid expansion of its industries, and then they started building, they started making towns into cities, and they reached a really large population. So now they're trying to focus back on the agricultural sector to meet the demands of the really large population that they have now.
Okay, thanks. Alfonso.
Sir,
Sige.
possibly because they shifted to like a large manufacturing, like manufacturing is one of their main sources of like income for the country. So like a lot of different countries even go to them for supply, for like their supply chain. So that's why a lot of the workforce goes to the manufacturing sector.
Absolutely. So both of you are spot on. No? So yeah, China actually is now known, no, even before, no, and even now, no, as the factory of the world. No? You're right, no. So they put in place policies, no. In the 1980s, no, they shifted away from a communist model, no, into a socialist slash market-oriented economy. No? So there are businesses there. No? There are private businesses in China. So they started coming out with policies that incentivized businesses to engage in manufacturing hubs. No? That's why you see, no, you're right, no, absolutely, that even international firms, you know, rely on China for their supply chains, no, as input suppliers. No, sometimes, you know, the devices we're using right now, all of these are made in China. No? Apple, Samsung, whatever, you know, Dell, Lenovo, all of these are manufactured in China. No? Kita nyo sa Apple, no? Parang ano yan, designed in Apple, designed in California, made in China, something like that. So because of that, what happened really was, what what Lewis was predicting actually really happened. No? So it attracted a lot of rural migrant workers. No? That really heavy, robust manufacturing hubs and competitive kasi state of the art. No? You go nga, sabi nga nila, no, before the pandemic, Wuhan, no, and other areas were really known for sophisticated labs, manufacturing things, etc., etc. So, and what they saw happening was actually the rural wages started to go up, and soon after, the urban wages also went up. So good yan, di ba? So one, because of following Lewis, no, they actually were able, no, China, the country was able to mop up surplus labor, meaning to a certain extent solve a lot of the unemployment problems, di ba? And second, people started earning more. Before, you wouldn't see Chinese tourists in the Philippines. And nagugulat ka, di ba? A few years ago, you see the Chinese buying properties left and right here because they're just so rich, no? Their wages started going up. You'll see the Chinese people start going on to tours in Europe, etc., etc. So yumaman sila as a whole. Now, the problem there is there's always a trade-off, no, when it comes to domestic and international trade. The problem is because the wages went up, and that was one of their advantages, no? China. I think downside naman. Sort of downside, no? While it's good for the people, no? The wages went up. Now, syempre, if you're a business person, a global, multinational firm, no? Of course, labor is still a cost, di ba? As you know, no? You still have to pay people. No? So now they started sensing now wages are going up, therefore our costs are going up. Now they started scanning other countries. So now some of the low quality or less sophisticated manufacturing have transferred. So for example, yung mga garments now it's Bangladesh, Thailand, Vietnam, even Philippines sometimes. No? If your parents or you shop at Banana Republic, sometimes you see it's made in the Philippines. No? So before kasi China, everything, no? Ngayon, marami nang umalis. No? But the good thing with China is they've still specialized in sophisticated manufacturing, so they can still manufacture state-of-the-art things, advanced technology. So yung mga lower, less sophisticated stuff, they transferred already. So they became, in a sense, less competitive for some industries, no? Na less complex. So yun, napunta na sa Philippines, Vietnam, Cambodia, for example. So that's the turning point. No? It's also a warning na, it's good for the domestic economy, good for people, but if you're reliant on international trade, there is also a potential downside. So that's the Lewis dual factor. No? It's the power of manufacturing to really solve unemployment. Kasi surplus labor lang naman, if you think about it, it's practically a it's synonymous to unemployment. Diba? Bakit may surplus labor? Of course, people would want to earn money, but because they can't find a job. So unemployment is synonymous with surplus labor. Manufacturing will be the one to solve that. So let's go back to the three sectors now. So last week, we covered or we reviewed the composition of GDP, diba? So GDP equals C plus I plus G plus NX. Diba? You know that already, or maybe you still remember. Another way of, kasi there are many ways to sort of compute or add different variables to GDP. Another way of looking at GDP is the sectoral composition. So any economy, and GDP is just a representation of the size of the economy. Any economy has three major sectors. Of course, these three major sectors have further subsectors. It's agriculture, manufacturing, then services. Agriculture is just basic production, no processing whatsoever. So that's basically growing crops, growing livestock, and selling them. That's agriculture. Planting, growing, selling, nurturing. Manufacturing is, by its very name, it's it's getting inputs and then converting it into something. That's manufacturing. So food products, canned goods, for example, yung mga Lucky Me ninyo, whatever, or Spam, that's manufactured already. So food processing, factories, vaccine manufacturing, those are manufacturing. Services naman actually are support to both. No? Services, that's financial services, banking, call centers, no, help desks, teaching services, janitorial, whatnot. No? So services, intangibles. You can't touch a service. Diba? Haircut, massage. You can't touch a haircut or a massage. It's an act. That's services. Now the theory is, and this has been proven correct, and I even included an economist article on Canvas. The usual path for a country in its path to development, the Rostow stages, is first you go from agriculture, no, and then you go to manufacturing. Manufacturing then should account for a larger share of your economy, and then ultimately your economy is now mostly from services. But the problem with the Philippines is we leapfrogged manufacturing. From agriculture, the bulk of our economy now is into services. Ang sinasabi nga natin is manufacturing really is the key to solving unemployment and to growing the economy. Kasi if you think about it, manufacturing, in the same way that we studied investment last week, no, it's a virtuous cycle, because if you continue manufacturing and selling things, you keep creating things, diba? So it has a lot of interlinkages. No? It can keep hiring people, it can keep building things, it grows the economy, diba? So it's really manufacturing. The problem is we did not have a robust manufacturing. We only had low-cost services. No. Yeah, janitorial services, BPO. There are some na high-end services like yung mga doctors, etc., lawyers, etc., legal services, teachers, etc., etc. So ito, you see, if you're looking for, just a tip, if you're looking for data or good statistics, global statistics, sometimes comparative data, you go to Statista. It's a really good resource, Statista. So here, Statista provided the share of these different three sectors in the Philippine economy. So even before, agriculture has been lagging. So you see, it was slowly declining. It became less than 10% of the economy. Now it's so roughly 10%. Manufacturing is, again, 30s lang. And services takes the lion's share. For any developing country really to propel its economy, dapat baliktad sana yung manufacturing and services. It's better if you have a larger manufacturing. Kasi in the Philippines, you have a lot of unemployed people with low incomes. It's really manufacturing that creates employment and at the same time increases wages, just like the Chinese example. It's really manufacturing, not services, that will be able to do that. If you want more information or a good example, read the Economist article on Canvas. Go ahead, Marco.
So right, India's facing the same problem right now with their BPO segment. Like it became all service. They also leapfrogged it. But how are they able to have robust economic growth compared to us?
India, I think India, to a certain extent, they're almost in the same boat. India is still a developing country, and they're big. It's actually harder to solve their issue. So it really depends. When you talk about India, it has to be nuanced kasi India is composed of, give or take, sabihin mo lang, I think it's 30 states. It's big. There's 1 billion people. Land size is So there are some pockets of really awesome economic stars, no? Pero like let's take the case of Mumbai, for example. Mumbai is their Makati, no, financial center. Pero even though they're growing rapidly, no, there's still a lot of people living in slums. So India is in the same boat. No? Pero to your point about, oh, what about India call centers? The good thing with India, and this is actually good thing you mentioned it. This is part of your, this is in the Economist article. Some economists are now arguing that it's okay actually to leapfrog into services as long as the services that you offer are higher value, more sophisticated. No? Like what India has started to do. If you notice, no, people will, sometimes Filipinos, no, they brag, but it's kind of nonsense. No? Some Filipinos will brag na, uy, tingnan nyo, we're number one na in terms of call centers, no? Even Indian firms are starting to invest here. Actually, that's a misnomer. What India did was, you guys are familiar with the BPO industry, di ba? BPO lang naman means business process outsourcing. It's basically a rich country outsourcing redundant back office support that they can to poorer countries kasi mura yung wages and then there's internet connectivity naman. What India did was, because think of the BPO industry as a spectrum. There's low value and there's high value. No, high value can be medical support, no, back office medical support, medical transcription, animation, computer programming, legal services. That's the sophisticated part, no, or IT programming. The less sophisticated part would be at the end of the spectrum is the call center. Because you don't need to have an advanced degree to do that. No? So what India did was they started focusing on the higher spectrum of the BPO. Now they're okay to have, let's say, poorer countries like the Philippines take over the call centers, the ones with lower value. Sinasabi nila, you can only leapfrog services if it's high quality services. Kasi if you have computer programming, India, sorry Marco, we're sort of in the same boat, but when it comes to human capital, going back to module, to last week's discussion, they're ahead of us. No? Educated Indians are known for solid quantitative skills, engineering stuff. So now they can actually attract BPOs in terms of computer programming, tech stuff. They have like an MIT there. So yun, they've established these higher end services, both manufacturing and services, and that has propelled their economy. No? Pero because they are a billion, what they're doing right now is not yet enough. There are still poorer states there. So you're right, medyo we're in the same boat, lamang sila siguro isang paligo. I mean, they're ahead of us by not that much. Yeah. Sige, Gabriel. Go ahead.
Sir, so what is holding back the Philippines from scaling its manufacturing industry?
There are many issues, no? There is now it's controversial kasi they stopped it kasi may mga methodological concerns. The World Bank, through the International Finance Corporation, it's one of their agencies, releases an annual report called Doing Business. Basically, they measure how hard it is for countries to attract investments. It's not easy, actually, kasi for a country, no, we're under a democratic capitalist society. So government cannot be the ones forever investing in manufacturing. It has to be the private companies. But the problem is, we make it hard, no, for both domestic and foreign investments to open up manufacturing hubs. No? Cost of electricity is the highest in Asia, next to Japan. The paperwork that you need just to open a business and run your business is just crazy, too much bureaucracy. The tax rates are higher than our neighboring countries. So a lot of times, even Filipino firms would opt to invest outside. So it's what we call, no, what economists call enabling environment. No? Nakaka-attract ka ba ng investment here? And we have not been able to. Ang pangit ng roads natin, our shipping costs are expensive. No, it all boils down to the cost of doing business. It's expensive in the Philippines. That's why that's pulling us back. Now there are some reforms, no, lower corporate tax rate with the Create Bill, which will get assigned to one group, no, in this class. No? There are some reforms, no, pero kulang pa. It's still expensive. No? You talk to foreign businessmen, they will keep complaining that it's hard to do business and expensive to do business in the Philippines. That's why kulang pa. That's why Thailand became ahead of us in terms of manufacturing. Kasi they were really able to put in place the right infrastructure, subsidized cost here, power, perfect utilities. No? Yun. So it's a matter of having a conducive environment to attract. Because manufacturing or investments, you should not expect government to do it. They should put in place a conducive environment so that others will come in. Go ahead, Marco.
Sir, how important will to getting FDI? How important will the changing the 40-60 structure for ownership?
Yes, perfect. Right now, there are 3 bills in Congress. That's 3 pending bills, no, amending certain provisions. No? I personally, and you ask all the foreign chambers, no, they want, no, we are actually in terms of FDI restrictiveness, and I can send you materials if you're really interested in this topic. No, they
Yes, sir.
rank countries, no, in terms of restrictiveness to foreign direct investment. We are third from the bottom. We are only ahead of Palestine and Libya, if I remember correctly. Because yun nga, the 60-40 rule, yun. And then the paperwork, additional paperwork, if you're a foreigner, you can't own land, telecoms is closed, media is closed, a lot of ano. So there are pending bills in Congress. There are some legislators that are being protectionist, kaya it's not yet up for the president's signature, but the Malacanang has certified these 3 bills, no, as urgent. No? They're amending, if you're really interested, they're amending the Public Service Act, the Retail Trade Liberalization Act, and the Foreign Investment Act. That's actually part of the work I do at USAID, no? Advocating for some of these policies. I will definitely send you some materials if you're interested in
Thank you,
this.
sir.
Remind me. And thanks for that. Thanks for the interest. All right. Good, no? I'm happy with the discussion that we're having right now and the interest. Sige. Let me know lang, no? For again, guys, no? If you're interested in more resources about any of these topics that we're covering, let me know. Email me so I can shoot back some resources. All right. So we're done with the structural approach. Now we go to an extreme paradigm, the Marxist paradigm. Oh, who can summarize the Marxist paradigm? Shift gears naman tayo. Sige, ako na lang. No worries. So for Marxist, no, it's kind of like the dual factor, no. He sort of simplified society into 2 categories. No? You have the capitalists on one hand, you have the working class on the other hand. So, you know, the capitalists, kasi you have to remember, Marxists grew up in a period where this was the norm. Talagang, you know, you have slave labor, no, wala pa yung mga minimum wage, no 9 to 6 schedules, no weekends, no. So capitalists exploit workers. And of course, and I agree with Marx here, no, the workers are the most important element because the businesses won't run, no, if the workers are not there. Now, capitalism requires additional capital accumulation and expansion. No? So again, parang Lewis, diba? So capitalism you continue building stuff. The profits that you earn, you keep on reinvesting that to your business. You keep growing. You keep buying capital. Again, capital here means durable goods. So you keep on producing, buying. No, but the problem is the economy. If you try to observe the economy, there are booms and busts. No? The economy cannot be just growing all the time. Sometimes it stalls, it crashes. No? And what happens is the businesses crash with the economy. Kasi people lose money, people become unemployed, the businesses don't sell as much. Now they're no longer generating profits, sometimes losses. So there's decline in productivity. What his prediction is there that this will lead to, kasi nga the workers feel exploited, and then capitalism, they have to start laying off workers, ganon. There will come a time where this is Marxist turning point naman, where there will be class revolts, revolution, riot, and then eventually this dissatisfaction turns into preference for socialism. So think of the Marxist paradigm as this. If you want to look at it from the Rostow lens, ito yung Rostow he added a sixth one, a sixth stage, socialism. Kasi nga, what happens is, ayan, mature na, there's manufacturing, wider industrial base, people are affluent. Pero this starts happening, riots. Now people want, there's a revolution, and whoever wins, the group that wins the revolution, now they take over and goes to socialism. Mamaya, we'll end the course with a discussion of the spectrum from anarchy to socialism to communism. So this is the Marxist paradigm. To a certain extent, this happened in Russia, pero the brand of socialism / communism was not great. Pero the criticism here is capitalism, whether there are booms and busts, as you saw in the Occupy Wall Street phenomenon, people will not necessarily go to riots, maybe limited marching on the streets, but it will not completely turn into a different form of government. To a certain extent, most countries are satisfied or pwede na with capitalists. It will not lead to this. So apart from Russia, maybe let's say Venezuela, some of these extreme countries, North Korea, this did not happen. So medyo malabo, medyo extreme yung kay Marxist. So just wanted to cover that for you so you're aware of all of these different paradigms. And there's another paradigm that is an offshoot of the Marxist thinking. Ito naman, it's the Marxist lens for international dynamics. It's what we call neo-colonial dependence. Ito naman, again, it's two warring factions. The classic Marxist is capitalists, the rich class versus the working class. Ito naman, it's countries naman. You have the rich countries, and more often than not, the colonists, the original colonists, like the US, Spain, France, exploiting the former colonies, the poorer countries. So that's your classic North versus South, East versus West phenomenon. The theory naman here is, again, for me, it's a weak theory, but still a lot of groups subscribe to this idea. They suspect that the rich countries, the US, Germany, British, etc., want to keep exploiting the former colonies. Pero they also provide them with some support so that these former colonies are dependent on them. And they also support them with additional income so that they can buy the American goods or Western goods. So it's very extractive. I will support dependent on it. So it's funny, sometimes, especially in Congress, every time, I don't know if you've seen this, every time there's a SONA, State of the Nation address by the president, any president, there are certain groups who rally, and it's always patalsikin, rehimeng US slash whoever the sitting president. Because for them, we're still under and in cahoots with our former colonists, and we are still under them. They're exploiting us. Ako, from a personal experience, and again, as you know, I work for USAID, I don't think so. Exploitation is not the ultimate objective. It's partnership for me. No? I might be wrong, pero that's from my experience, having worked in the US as well and in different countries as well. So I think it's a weak paradigm. But just for your own awareness, there are still groups or people, especially those closely affiliated with the Makabayan bloc in Congress, Kabataan, Bayan Muna, mga ganon. So for me, I find it weak, but some people really strongly subscribe to this idea. So it's that Marxist mentality. It's an us versus them, working class or poor versus rich. Here, there are two sort of paradigms when it comes to the dependency model. So again, it's kind of like the neo-Marxist, this other paradigm. It again is a poor versus rich to a certain extent, paradigm or phenomenon. It's called the false paradigm. And again, all of these things I'm summarizing. The materials, the food materials are there on campus. False paradigm naman, it's not so much that the rich countries are exploiting us. It's that the rich countries, when they want, whether it's intentional or not, when they try to help other countries develop, they actually offer things that have worked for them without thinking if it's going to work for other countries. So it tries to replicate what worked in other countries. The main criticism of this paradigm, the main criticism that this paradigm wants to put forward is, it's not a cookie cutter approach. The problem is sometimes when America thinks, this worked for them, they try to export this recipe, but sometimes it doesn't work in other countries. And related to that, they also think, sometimes the elites, the rich elites in the country or the top thought leaders, also reflect the paradigm of other countries that might not be suited to the local context. You go to you research the background of your professors. A lot of Ateneo professors, UP professors, went to Europe or the US for grad school. So sinasabi, they're accusing also of the elites, intellectual and political elites of having a false paradigm, parang masyadong brainwashed by the Westerners or the rich ones. A good example here is what we call the Washington Consensus. And I don't need to explain this because this is not the point. Pero what happened here, just for your own consumption here is in the 1980s, a lot of countries, Latin American countries, even the Philippines, during the Marcos time, our economy was in shambles. So here, you have the elites, the elite Western countries, they have what they call the World Bank and the IMF. In the 80s kasi medyo World Bank and IMF got a bad rap. They're much better now. So before, they go to a country, they have like a set menu of things that a country needs to do for them to improve their situation. So it's called the Washington Consensus. And it's a set of, how many is this? It's a set of 10, I think, policy prescriptions that they will offer to the country And the problem here is it's not just offering advice, no, it's also, oh, we will lend you money, you can borrow from us if you put in place this policy. So some of these policies actually wreaked havoc, no, in Latin America, in Chile. No, it led to great devaluation of their money, etc., etc. They opened up, for example, their economy, but they were not ready yet. They liberalized trade, no. They tried to privatize certain companies that were not supposed to be privatized. So yung mga ganon, no? Fiscal discipline, even though people had nothing to eat, no. So no, you have to, tighten your belt. So a lot of some of these were good, but again, the paradigm is, again, going back to our favorite cartoon, any prescription, no, of what needs to be done, no, should be balanced. Whether it worked in this particular country or area, it doesn't mean it's gonna work here. So it has to be applicable. So okay naman yung Washington Consensus, but you nuance it. Maybe out of this, you choose one and then add one more policy. So ganon, di ba? Now, the World Bank, IMF, even Western aid agencies, no, are more consultative. No, based on studies, we think this may work, but what do you think? Philippine government or developing country government will say, okay, sige, let's think about it. So now it's more a consultative process. So the false paradigm, I would urge you to remember this. No? And you can apply this anywhere. You can apply this anywhere, even sa panliligaw if you want, no, for the guys out there, the girls. No? Does it mean it worked for Marco, for example? It will work for Gabriel. So yung tactics pwedeng iba. Yeah, so ganon, it's the same. So the false paradigm is actually a useful thing, even for development or in any sector. And actually, that's part 2 of module 3. So it's a good summary of different models and paradigms, no, from emphasis on manufacturing to more radical paradigms. No, the good thing about Marx, though, is its emphasis on equality, no, and focusing on the working class. Yun naman yung maganda sa kanya. The neo-Marxists, I don't necessarily subscribe to that. The false paradigm is also important. It's diba? Like you guys, no? When you were doing the CBMS, no, you had 3 areas, no? Doesn't mean the intervention for Marikina is this. Doesn't mean that can be done to Saguday or San Remigio. Same thing. So that's a useful paradigm. So to end, no, again, we've been talking about Marx, communism, social, etc. Last time, no, and we can, just to repeat, sorry, I like to repeat myself sometimes. I offered this, no, out of all the paradigms, I offered this particular thing, what I call social democracy. Again, it's still within the capitalist democratic framework. People are free, but there is a strong government that regulates business, no, just to rein them and to prevent them from abusing. And there are strong programs to address inequality, capabilities approach. So you don't equalize incomes. No? Hindi pwede all families will have the same income. No, it's not that. It's equalizing, let's say, access to education, access to healthcare, so that people can realize their own paths, their own income state, their own whatever they want with their lives. So I provided the spectrum just as a handy guide to you guys. No? Anarchy is, of course, the crazy one where there's no authority. Communism is the extreme. No? So there is less personal freedoms, no private property. Government will dictate what you will have, what you will need. No? And again, going back to the Marx ideology, usually this happens after a revolution from the working class. And that working class forms a government, and now they dictate. And no more freedoms. Socialism is more mild. There is still some private freedom. You're still allowed to own property, but some of the major economic factors of production are owned and operated by government, or they dictate what's going to happen there. And usually, socialism is still, it's not usually through a revolution. It's through, an electoral process. And in the middle, you have the typical capitalist democracy where you have some regulations, and some social programs, or not. Could be just capitalist without, bahala kayo, without caring for the marginalized. And of course, the laissez-faire, the neoclassical, it's really market is king, democratic, but it's capitalist, government hands off, and no social programs. Wag na lang. And then other. So just wanted to go ahead, Marco.
So the one that you were recommending, the social democracy, is that related to like Keynesian economics?
Keynesian naman is governments. Keynes was when you think of government intervention, well, Keynesian is synonymous to government intervention. To a certain extent, kasi Keynesian naman is more, Keynesian mentality or the Keynesian paradigm is more to do with government will have to intervene when there is a market failure, where there's something wrong. So it can be part of social democracy, but Keynesian is not necessarily equally translatable to social democracy. It can be part of. Kasi Keynesian naman did not say na, you have to be strong in social programs, etc., etc. Nothing like that. It's government intervention for a market failure. He didn't necessarily specify what the market failure is. He did not say it has to be the addressing inequality, etc., etc. Recession, mga ganun. So it can be, but it's not synonymous. It can be part of it. And yes, you're right. It's an important part because social democracy requires government intervention. Kasi Keynesian is synonymous. Pero it's not one-to-one correlation. I hope that helps.
Thank you, sir.
All right, so we're done. I don't know if you guys have additional questions, and thank you for your interest, guys. I really enjoy it when people are interested, when we're having a good discussion. So even if it's outside this course, if it's general development economics interest, put me an email. I'll be more than happy to share some of real life resources for you guys. Alrighty. So any other questions, comments, parting words? I think we're good. All right. Sige, have a good evening, guys, and have a good dinner. I'll see you next week.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.